Well, I look around and I see a lot of smiling faces. I see a lot of young folks. This is amazing for me to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. My talk is, what does a chemist do? You might see that my name, Rick Ziebell, and this idea of a technical fellow. And what that really means is something simple, is that I have a number of patents and a number of trade secrets that I've worked on over my last 35 years of career as a chemist. Those have amounted over this time to be worth over $1 billion. And so let me start out by just giving you that helicopter view of what a career in chemistry equals. What we do is we take materials, resources, and we convert them to something valuable. Those resources can be low cost or even nuisances to our environment. And when we do that, we're able to take something that might cost a few dollars per ton and create value that's worth many hundreds of dollars per pound. That's the commercial 50,000-foot view. But I want to take you on a journey today about what it really means to be a chemist, I think, at least from my point of view. Let's take this drive down the road and look at the role of chemistry in our daily life and see how it might affect us as a population and how, as a career, we can move into this area. Now, I'm going to need you to take out a pen and pencil. Not that you need to take a lot of notes, but I'm going to reference some interesting resources for you along the way. So you want to take down some website things and some things I point out. While we're taking this journey, I need you to put your glasses on because I want you to look far into the future, okay? Not just what's happening today, this year, or while you're in college, but think about the long term here. I hope to give you some clarity. A role of chemistry is, in many places, what you are learning here today. A laboratory, very much a laboratory chemist, education, you have great educators here, and there's a lot about the environment as it relates to chemistry. There's another area called industrial chemistry that deals with materials and polymers and alternative fuels. And there's a third area of great concern to us, which is medicine, pharmaceuticals, toxicology, forensics, and legal. Now, these are all kind of three defined areas in chemistry. Now, I'm not an expert at everything. I have a very specific knowledge base right around the industrial materials and polymers in chemistry. And so I don't pretend to say that this is the most important area. It's just the only part of it I know. So as I go through this presentation today, I'll be focusing on these areas. But please, I see tables outside talking about all of these other areas. Please explore. The way I want to convey to you the message of a career in chemistry is by looking at megatrends and how it affects the worldwide population, every man, woman, and child on this planet. And I think from that perspective, we can see the importance of this role. So I'll start by looking at elastomeric materials with respect to 5 different subjects today: energy, water, climate change, safety and security, and demographics. And as we start to look and center in on the first topic, energy, let's take a look at what a chemist can do about energy efficiency. Did you know, as a matter of fact, that in the next 20 years, energy demand is going to increase by 50%? That's because of population, and that's also because of a move from an agrarian society to a populous city society. And in those cities, they will demand 40% of our energy requirements worldwide. And that factor is growing. That's more than planes, trains, and automobiles, transportation. That's more than industrial. That's 40% of the total energy output of the world. We will need better and smarter energy sources. Think renewable resources. I started the talk by saying what a chemist does is convert resources, yes? So we have to think about the non-renewable that we currently use, which are coal, fuel, crude oil, nuclear, and even batteries. These are non-renewable. And start moving towards sun and wind and hydroelectric. So how can a chemist light the way? Let me show you some examples. Something I've worked on, which is LED lighting. And you see these all the time now. Very lightweight modules, very high intensity lights that change color, can move directions in automobiles. You've seen stadium lighting, where for very little wattage or very little current, we can produce much more light energy than incandescent technologies. And it's all based on that light-emitting diode, that little tiny little chip that's buried usually many, many times over in these type of lighting systems. If we dissect that little thing and we find out that it actually has a diode inside that vibrates at a very high frequency. I'm sure some of you may have used these LED lights in their early generations a few years ago, and they never seemed to last as long as they were supposed to. That's because a diode destroys itself over time because it vibrates. So, with the use of converting sand on a beach, I was able to figure out with a lot of great people how to create polysiloxanes, which is basically a rubber sand. And in doing that, we encapsulate with an optical grade silicone around that diode. We attenuate the vibrations, and now we have 20 years usable life out of a diode. These are some of the improvements that we can make. Now, why do we do that? Well, for energy savings. Do you know a diode produces the same level of energy at 1,000th the amount of current? So now we can light our cities much more efficiently. And then there's getting that energy to the cities themselves, called transmissions. We have a power plant, or we have a solar generating system, or a hydroelectric dam, or we have wind farms, but they're not in the city. We have to bring that power into the city. And what that causes is higher and higher voltage requirements. And as voltages get higher, what we see is towers growing from smaller to larger to larger to larger, and now we have these huge towers. What we want is an environment that looks a lot like this. But what we're starting to see is environments that look like this. So how can chemistry help? Because we're going to this. Underground electrical distribution. And you see these 4 cables. Each one of those is 750,000 volts. That's 3 million volts moving through there. If water gets in that tunnel, or moisture, and comes in contact with the electrification of those wires, you'll have an explosion that you'll certainly hear about on the news. So we developed, again, a dielectric-proof siloxane system that first uses the hydrophobic nature of siloxanes to shed water. And in studies, we're proving that that will go forth and do that for 100 years, so polymers that last. And in long-lasting, we have to build the dielectric strength of these polymers to a higher degree. And we do that with multiple layers of sheaths. But the most important aspect are things that I've helped develop in the dielectric elastomer range. So that's what these cables and this underground electrification, much safer. Birds, human beings, animals, as we increase the voltage of these lines and we have them above us, they emit frequencies that interfere with biological systems. So placing them underground around a conduit that's grounded itself isolates us from that problem, and that helps the environment. And it's certainly a megatrend. Then another story about the Crane Communications building in Chicago. It's a beautiful, blustery fall evening of Chicago. I love this picture. We were able to work on a specific building here, this diamond-shaped roof Crane Communications building. And so one of the things that we do is we take an infrared camera and we do a close-up of this building at night. Now you can see in the background temperatures that we're below freezing, black. And what we're seeing from this building is a lot of green and yellow. And you can see that that's approaching 60, 70 degrees. This building was built with very little thermal insulation, something called fenestration. Every place there's a window, every place there's a door, that's where energy leaks. So part of what I do, we took something of poor value and built it into something of high value. And that was in terms of carbon black and a polymer called ethylene propylene dimer. Now you have to understand something first when I tell this story, that up in Canada and other places where there's permafrost, methane gathers under that hard permafrost soil, what they call the hydrate stable layers. And that methane bubbles out. And did you know that methane actually is a stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide? Sequestering methane is absolutely necessary. And we found a way to do that by running its natural gas through a reactor that separates the hydrogen from the carbon. We burn the hydrogen off with oxygen, and what does that create? Water, steam. We take half of the energy and we run 3 cities in Canada. All of the carbon, 100% of it, is converted to carbon black, which then is a solid particle, and we condense it from about 1,000 times in volume to 1 unit of volume. That then is put into rubber to make it strong and thermally insulated. And then the rubber itself, we have a renewable resource. We make the rubber out of sugar cane or corn. We don't use crude oil because that would be non-renewable. We use natural crops, usually the stuff people don't want to eat. And then we turn that into ethanol. We synthesize that as an organic polymer. We add the carbon black to it, and we get thermal insulation seals that now are 98% efficient and turn our cities into fortresses that can protect human beings from the cold and from the heat. Well, that was energy. Let's move fastly along in the megatrends to water. Did you know that eating beef takes a lot of water? We've all heard this. 1 liter of bottled water takes 4 liters of water to manufacture. Water, as the population centers grow, fresh water particularly, is of major concern. The consumption of fresh water really looks like 10% as from the cities, but that's growing. Industries take 20%, but most of it is agriculture, a full 70% of freshwater consumption. So I want to relate this story as an interesting day for a chemist. About a decade and a half ago, I had 2 meetings for a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. My first meeting was driving right by here up to Pasadena to go to Jet Propulsion's laboratory. And I was very jazzed about this meeting. I was there talking to other chemists, doctors, PhDs, about how to get a rover to land on Mars. Those first rovers were called Spirit and Opportunity. And they had a problem. Mars is cold, and polymers freeze. And if they freeze, and the rover's moving, the vibration will break all of these wires and wire harnesses and all these electrical connectors, and that rover won't last very long on the surface, maybe just a few hours. But we had just worked on a phenylated siloxane polymer, another siloxane derivative, that got us down to minus 182 centigrade before it hardened. Well, guess what the lowest temperature on Mars is? About minus 170. So we had a Mars-capable polymer. I was so jazzed because it was a great fit. And we stayed there. It was an hour-long meeting that I just got out of there at lunch to get off to my next meeting. And my next meeting as a chemist was a place down in San Clemente. Drove right by Cerritos down to San Clemente and went to a company called Fluid Master. What do they make? Toilet seals. As a chemist, I'm trying to get something to the moon in the morning, and I'm trying to get water reduction in each and every flush. And I thought, maybe this second meeting really isn't going to be worth it. I mean, I was so jazzed by getting to go to JPL. On one hand, the Mars missions were perfect landings, 300 million mile hole-in-one. It found blueberries, which were actually hematite formed in the presence of water. We proved that water was once on Mars. The atmosphere contains storms and twisters. Oh my, there's weather on Mars. Craters of uncovered rock formations, giving the first off-world geology lesson, and they're still talking about it today. And because of those electronics, we were able to put a human eye on board those, and we had panoramic views, just like you were there. But on the other hand, the second visit, we found a way to conserve 40% of the water each and every flush. It works with poor plumbing, so low water pressure. It can use recycled brown water, contaminated water, thus not using freshwater supplies. It survives harsh chemicals, so we can use internal septic and not dump that sewage into freshwater supplies. There was low cost and better affordability, and today, since 2012, 80% of every toilet, almost every single toilet in the United States, uses some of the materials I helped develop for that seal. That's kind of boring though, right? I mean, on one hand, I got to work on these babies. On the second hand, I realized that fresh water, or the lack thereof, is killing major populations. And in fact, toilets use 24% of the freshwater supplies worldwide, and leaks, which I'll talk about in a minute, are set at 12%. And then I found this very interesting chart where in the years of 2008 to 2012, before we had this system, that these blue circles represent areas where cholera and diarrhea type of diseases occur, and the size of the circle shows you the severity. And in fact, over that period of time, it was estimated that over 100,000 people died from these diseases because of lack of fresh water and contamination with sewage. And I think back to those days, what was the most important meeting? Was it the one that got the rovers up there? Or was it the one that may have potentially saved tens of thousands of lives every year? I don't know, but that's what a chemist can do. So, now, water efficiency also is an important aspect, especially around here in LA. A couple years ago, there was a huge leak in the Poly Pavilion at UCLA. I show a picture here. That pavilion was swamped. All of the seats, the entire thing had to be reconstructed. It was down for 18 months, cost millions of dollars. We see this happening over and over again. In fact, the EPA is estimating over $300 billion in the next 10 to 20 years to build the infrastructure up. And the largest portion of that, some $200 billion, represents the need for water distribution projects within municipalities. And the municipalities themselves are asking questions. We don't want to replace this stuff every few years. We want 100 years before we have to touch it. But that in itself, with existing technologies, is a very hard task indeed. In fact, they only have 5 choices. They have ductile iron piping, they have vitrified clay, they have concrete, but these 3 have some inherent problems. In fact, they're just exactly what's there now with short-lived life expectancies. But we're now developing polymer systems. Yes, chemistry again, HDP and PVC. But what we find is they still have a strong failure mode called sealings and joints. So this is the old way we created water piping and sewage piping. This is the new systems. These are, particularly with PVC, 100-year lasting under the ground. Polyvinyl chloride is resistant to antimicrobial, and it will hold together for that period of time. You see the black seals that are inside the blue flanges, and you'll see the brown seals that are outside of those pipes. Now, what we're working on right now is using that eco-friendly EPDM and that Thermax N990 to take these nuisance methane gases, sequester them, and actually use that to control our environment. So write this down, double whammy. That's what a chemist can do. We can take a nuisance gas out of the environment and we can put it to use to further protect our environment. Double whammy. So let's switch to another megatrend, climate change. And let's look at environmental protection. I want to talk a little bit about burning of fossil fuels. Okay, it's a little bit of my pet peeve, but not a political one like we see in the news. As a chemist, raw materials is what makes things work. And if we keep burning all of the important raw materials, someday we won't be able to make polymers anymore. And that will be a very bad day. So I have, as a chemist, an even greater need to protect the environment than, say, the common citizen. It's my whole way of doing business. Those raw materials are important to us. So did you know that beyond CO2, and we hear a lot of CO2 generation and the greenhouse gas effect that creates, that VOCs are another important issue. And VOCs, volatile organic content, is prevalent from both industries and transportation. And we've done a lot of work on that because VOC mixing with NOx gases produces a high degree of ground ozone, which is also very poisonous to human beings, very destructive. And so we've worked on programs that were based on fuel recovery. So the fuel vapors, you probably go to the gas station and you put your nozzle in a tank, and around that is a sheath. That sheath is stage 2 vapor recovery, but it's only about 70 to 75% efficient. We're now designing onboard refueling vapor recovery systems that will take that to almost 100% efficiency. And the way it would look in 2020 today, if we hadn't built these recovery systems, we would be putting 700,000 metric tons of VOCs into the air, which would be responsible for over 40% of the global warming power. But because in the United States, and only the United States, we've implemented this, we are saving the environment. The other countries like China, Asia in general, and India are not implementing these types of savings. And this is some of the areas that we need to focus. It's not just CO2. Man is creating an indelible imprint on this environment, and we need to look at all those sources, not just focus on what the news asks us to focus on. So how do we do that? With something called fluoroelastomers, fluorinating elastomers. And we do this with ethylene propylene again, and we are fluorinating them with halogen sources, feldspar. And we've just opened new mines in the US so we can generate these polymers. In combination with fluorinated silicones now, another siloxane, we're able to make double penetration seals because permeation, as a chemist, we know how permeation works based on Fick's law. It's diffusion and it's solubility. And we can defeat the common chemistry term of like dissolves like by using both an apolar and polar membrane to take diffusionary constants down to 1/1,000,000th of what we would get without it. So here's my story. In 1990, if you bought a car then and you left it with the engine running inside your garage, with the engine not running inside your garage or on the driveway, that vehicle would pollute the environment more than a modern automobile traveling down the freeway at 70 miles an hour. Here's another note I want you to take. This is the ACS. 2 weeks ago, I gave a paper at the American Chemical Society on hydrogen fuel cells. And I have a little video to show you the outcome of that paper. But this website, www.rubber.org, you will come up with this screen, and you will see on this screen that there are student services and career centers. I sat on several committees, and there's over $1 million of unclaimed scholarships from the American Chemical Society. And all you have to do is probably put together a little chemistry poster, and they will even pay your way to Independence, Ohio next April. So I'm advertising for this, and please, I'm part of the ACS and have been for all 35 years. I do ask you to go visit this website. So let me have Brenda tell you about hydrogen fuel cells and the paper that I presented.
Electric vehicles are on the rise to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but they do have some constraints, such as long charging times and limited accessibility of charging stations. What if we could charge our vehicle batteries on board using hydrogen fuel cells? Or even better, what if our vehicles had efficient storage, supply, and refueling systems designed for hydrogen fuel cells? Revolutionary fuel cell vehicle designs using polymer electrolyte membrane technologies, also known as PEM technologies, are already starting to emerge. RD Abbott teamed up with Cancarb and Arlenxio to explore elastomer sealing performance advancements using Thermax N990 and X-butyl bromobutyl designed for hydrogen fuel system technologies. In this study, we employed hydrogen permeation testing at elevated 90 degrees Celsius to better mimic the current operating conditions for PEM fuel cells. We evaluated these permeation-resistant polymer systems with synergistic tortured path mechanisms in a fuel cell operational environment. Based on our findings, here are some benefits for using Thermax N990 and X-butyl bromobutyl-based compounds designed for use in hydrogen fuel system applications. With Cancarb's Thermax N990 carbon black, enhanced tortured path permeation resistance with quasi-graphitic structures filler technology, optimal sealing performance with key physical properties such as tensile and compression set, excellent molding and extruding processability, and economic advantages from high filler loadings. With Arlenxio's X-butyl bromobutyl polymers, superior permeation resistance and versatile cure chemistry of the base polymer, enhanced processing performance and physical properties, and acceptance of high Thermax N990 filler loadings. Potential applications include gaskets, hoses, tank linings, and O-rings. Our findings resulted in a 60% reduction in permeation over traditional technologies. This indicates that elastomeric seals using Thermax N990 and X-butyl bromobutyl greatly minimize hydrogen fuel losses. Not only can these advancements improve the efficiency of hydrogen fuel cell delivery systems, but they can also lead to safer operation overall. This is just the latest collaborative applied curiosity from RD Abbott and our supplier partners. We're working to answer complex questions, improve sustainability, and promote positive environmental changes.
So this is a paper that was presented. You can definitely get on the website and read my paper. It's a good bedtime reading, I promise. You'll be asleep by the third page. It's papers that we present when we have these important findings. Last year I gave 5 of them at the ACS. This year I gave 3 of them. So, climate change. It's a very political issue, but I hope that we vote our conscience coming up. Safety and security. The freedom from fear is our next megatrend. And let me say that we probably can't do much about freedom from want or catastrophic threats or world peace with chemistry. But we can definitely find ways to affect our safety with respect to influenza pandemics. About 10 million deaths occur annually associated with indirect contact transmission of infectious disease. Antibiotic-resistant microbes are becoming immune. In the US alone, the CDC currently estimates that 2 million people are infected each year with antibiotic-resistant microbes, and 23,000 people die, and that's growing. The World Health Organization is listing four of the top 10 threats to global health in 2019 as the influenza pandemic, antimicrobial resistance, high-threat pathogens, and the one that really astounds me is population vaccine hesitancy. Folks do not want to get vaccinated. They want to go to the doctor and get cured. But for these pandemic-type diseases, hospital is where the vectors of infection are most commonly occurring. So what can we do as a chemist? First, we do something called QUAC, not like a duck, but like a quaternary ammonium compound. And we are able to find ways to graft these onto polymers. On the left, you see a normal polymer or substrate of any time, like the desk or your phone, or a seat, or the handle of the door. Planktoid bacteria transfer from someone, and they find themselves creating a biofilm on the surface. This biofilm then transfers to the next person that touches that substrate. And that's how transmission diseases occur. We've come together and taken, at least to elastomers, this quaternary ammonium compound, and been able to graft it so it sticks up on the surface, represented by those little plus and yellow sticks coming out of the blue substrate. That forces contact cell death. And bacteria work with this quorum sensing technique. If they find a biofilm, they go, hey guys, come over here. Come here. But if, on the other case, they die, they send a signal to actually create cell death and induce cell death deeper into the population. And then the residual biofilm reduction runs away from that area. In just 10 minutes of contact, we're able to reduce the number of bacteria on a surface by 10,000 to 1. Here's the proof. Red is dead, green is alive. After 10 minutes, using confocal laser scanning microscopy and dyeing the specimens, we're able to kill the bacteria on the surface of a substrate and thus keep it clean. And there's no running out of this. That substrate will continue to do that for the life of the substrate. It is bound in the substrate. It is not leachable. It is not extractable. It doesn't hurt human beings. It just kills the bugs. So let's move on to the last, demographics. And this is the one most important to me for reasons you can probably imagine, because I'm going to talk about the aging population. It is a great thing in our planet that in just a few years, 30, we would probably reach 9 billion people in population. That's an amazing factor. In fact, it is true that there are now more people older than the age of 65, I'm 57, than 5 or younger. And in about 2018, the graph inverted. And it's going to get more and more so. So how are we going to help this aging community? Help me, that is. Will is outside at the booth, and this is his technology about carbon nanotubes and putting them into doped silicone and creating useful devices. Again, carbon, sequestered, silicone, polymer from a beach, and we're creating a medical device that can do some of the following things. Retuning the body with wearable neuromodulation therapies. This is a new technology, and it's coming. Our first example is essential trimmer, and I'm starting to get that a little bit. I shake a little. And as we get older, that medical condition is characterized by involuntary rhythmic contractions and relaxations, a progressive neurological disorder, so it's going to be worse as I get older, and the most common movement disorder. It affects 4% of the population below the age of 65, lucky me, I'm in that 4, and 20% over the age of 65. So, we have found a way to read the human nervous system with an extraneous patch. We found that the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, and the sensor motor cortex can be controlled by the ventral intermediate nucleus. So that's the complexity of the neural network, and we can control this feedback. Here's a patient who's trying to write with essential tremor. The device that we helped create, at least the materials of the device, are wrapped around the wrist. There's a period of time where it starts to learn the impulses. The shaking produces a movement, which the watch can then read, and then it senses the stimulation and sends a counter wave, sine, cosine, to that wave, and changes the intermediate nucleus behavior. Now watch her write. That was a simple one-time wearing of just 40 minutes, and that therapy will last for days. We find 75% compliance. That's an amazing, amazing outcome. The way we do it is with 3 silicone-doped pads with carbon nanotubes, single-wall carbon nanotubes, that can transfer very accurately the electrical impulse from these nerves to the brain and read them and send a counterwave to stop the shaking. Watch out. When some of those companies like Nike get a hold of this, how would you like to go to the basketball court unpracticed and make 10 slam dunks or 10 free throws in a row every time? Just turn on the watch and it'll teach your body how to get that perfect movement. That's what's coming, guys. Sports will be completely different. I wanted to show you some carbon nanotubes with electron microscopy. And what I'm showing you here is carbon nanotubes down to the micrometer size. And what I'm going to do is blow it up for you in successive blow-ups. That's a single-wall carbon nanotube. And what it does inside of a silicone is it creates literally trillions of electron paths that search out that electrical signal, read it. The computer makes that calculation, and then through a second patch produces that charge to counter or to control the muscle behavior. Perfect free throw percentages are on their way. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of my talk. We've covered all of these important megatrends: energy, water, climate change, safety, security, and demographics. I talked to you a little bit about my career and a couple of stories. There's many more. Come visit me out on the booth. Remember all of the possible careers and chemistries and how you can make a difference. That's what a chemist can do. That's what I've tried to do, and I've had a lot of fun doing it in 35 years. I plan to be around for another 20, so I'm not going away. At RD Abbott, applied curiosity is the way we do work. Curiosity is the root of nearly every business decision and strategic action we take. Thank you. Come see Will and Rick at the booth. Thank you very much.